In this portion, I'm going to talk about the biggest scams in entertainment contracts. Okay, like I was talking about earlier, I was a little bit peeved this week because one of my clients had me review a contract, and this isn't surprising to me, right? As an entertainment attorney, I review contracts often that are very one-sided, and sometimes it's industry standard, right? As far as how things go, how it works, but in this case it was very predatory, and it was stuff that my client would not have known about had she not had me review the contract. And so because these are things that I have seen come up multiple times in these contracts, it's not just music contracts, it's not just entertainment contracts, it's just contracts in general. We're going to dive into all of it today. So in our biggest scams in entertainment contracts, the first thing I want to talk about is overcharging. Okay, so when it comes to what the rate is, I think that people, especially if you're hiring someone for a certain service, right? So if you're hiring someone to maybe make something musically, make something via video, whatever it is. If they're a service provider and you haven't worked with that kind of person before, and they're putting some kind of outrageous number just because maybe you can pay it because you have like your life savings, ready to go, it doesn't mean you should. And the other piece of this is that often I find that people who will put exorbitant rates will do so because they have some kind of resume thing that they can point to, right? So they might have, had some hit song if it's like a music production services agreement, right? So they had a hit song 20 years ago. Or, if they're some kind of filmmaker, right? So they were able to, land some huge gig and it's some flashy credit that makes us all starry-eyed and we want to work with that person. And that's exciting. But I think that timing is really important, right? So I always look at, how many times has this person done this thing, right? So how much can we justify the rate that they're trying to charge? And then when was it, right? So if someone had that hit thing 10, 20, 30 years ago, for me, there's a little bit of relevancy there, which also comes into play of our negotiation on the price, because, sometimes we can point to things like industry standard, right? So we might say, industry standard says that, music video directors can charge up to $50,000. If it's a music video director for a major label that's doing a weekend video, do you see what I'm saying? But then, the $50,000, let's say, is being charged by an independent director doing an independent production, right? So you have different scenarios where someone is applying something that's maybe normal in a different scenario to a situation where it's not really appropriate. But in this instance, maybe my client doesn't know that. This is their first production. This is their first album. And so, they're just happy to have someone who believes in them, right? Air quotes, believes in them, has said nice things, wants to work with them. I get all of that. But then they're like, okay, I can make your dreams come true, but I'm going to be charging you like double or triple the value of what I'm actually doing. And so that's one thing of why, obviously I think that is really important. If you aren't sure, getting someone who actually knows this stuff and is familiar with how these deals work and what industry standard is, like an entertainment attorney, is really helpful, because you want to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of. Okay, so that's number one. As far as the biggest scams in entertainment contracts that I see, they are overcharging you. Number two, and the biggest scams that I see has to do with the fact that there's no transparency. So again, talking about the money, I find that, when someone conveniently leaves out a breakdown of what they're charging, that's a red flag. Okay, so if you're going to be charging my client $100,000 to make their dreams come true, whatever that is, you're going to make, the next 2 albums and a couple music videos or whatever it's going to be. And you're going to do these things, which my client, is very excited about. And it's a very emotionally charged decision. But then in the contract, it says, it's $100,000 and I'm going to make everything happen. I'm going to hire all the subcontractors, the DP, I should say, the director of photography, the gaffer, the music producers, but doesn't define how that's being paid, where it's going. I mean, quite frankly, maybe they're doing all of it for $5,000 because that's what it actually costs to hire everyone to do all this stuff. And then they're taking the remainder fee. And if you actually knew that, and you knew that, for example, $90,000 was going just for that person's fee, you might think twice about it. So it's really important that there's transparency. And, I'm a big believer in just being very front and upfront and having these conversations, because the emotional nice feelings go away when you're actually working on your project, or if what they deliver to you at the end of it is not what you wanted. It's not what you expected. And so that's why we kind of go into it and we have these conversations. And again, this is the beautiful part. If you have an entertainment attorney, I will be the douche. I will be the shark. I will be the mean one who will kind of call out these things. And that is a good thing, but you don't have to have an entertainment attorney to have these conversations. If you see something, I don't understand why it's this high. I don't understand what the breakdown is. Can you provide that? I mean, they're simple questions. So number 3, when it comes to the biggest scams in entertainment contracts, is when the person tries to attach to a future happening, right? A future event. So if you see in your contract that someone is like, all right, so you're not only going to pay me the $100,000, I'm not going to be clear about how that money is being sent or spent. I will just simply do the thing, right? I'll deliver you a product and that's it. But when in the contract it says, so if, for example, this results in you getting, I don't know, signed with a record label, then I am going to attach to that and I'll be like your manager, right? Or I will be the one that has to do your next 5 music videos. So it's guaranteed work for that person, which, that's okay. If they're going to try to negotiate something for future work, they can try. But this goes back to, well, are they doing you any favors? Why should you do them favors? If you have someone working for you and you're hiring a service provider, always remember that you are in the advantage point of negotiation. Okay. So what I mean by that is they're not doing you any favors. So why are you going to do them any favors? Now, you might think they're wonderful and that's great. And so you're fine with it. Cool. Agree to it. But when it's kind of like the first time you're working with someone, you don't know what's going to happen. You might hate their guts by the end of the project, quite frankly. So as far as, are there going to be future events that that person is attaching to? And then having a conversation about whether you're comfortable with that. Remember, guys, you can always push back and say, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want it. Take it out of the contract. I think that there's kind of this intimidation that if it's in the contract, we don't feel like we can say delete it. We feel like we have to work within the confines of what the words are on the paper that the other person wrote. But that's not how it works, guys. It's a negotiation. So you can just say, I want to take all that out. And we're just not going to do that. All right. So number 4 on the biggest scams in entertainment contracts, it's called indemnification. Remember this word. I want you to, when you're sleeping tonight, if it's a nightmare, if it's a good dream, I don't care what it is, I need you to remember indemnification. Okay? When you see the word indemnification in your contract, it should be in almost every single type of contract that you will do, including services agreements. But indemnification says that if the other person does something bad that results in you getting sued, so for example, you paid that person $100,000 and then they hired a subcontractor, right, to help with the music production. And then they never paid that subcontractor. So now you've paid the $100,000 and that subcontractor is suing you because it was for you after all. If there's indemnification language, it protects you and it says, hey, guy I hired, you're supposed to fix this, make it right, deal with it. Your attorney's fees, you pay for it. So what I see oftentimes is that indemnification will only be one way, right? So it only protects the other person from you doing something bad that gets them sued. So just keep in mind, it always has to be mutual. You got to be mutually protecting each other from the bad acts and bad things that can happen, right? All right. And then number 5 on the biggest scams in entertainment contracts, ownership. Okay. If you're paying this guy or gal $100,000 to do something for you, to make something for you, you should own the thing, right? So we were talking about, recording a studio album, and you hire a bunch of musicians. Those musicians, if the understanding is that they're just performing for a fee on your record, they should not own the final thing. You own the final thing. And so if it says in your contract that that person has any kind of co-ownership, big red flags. And that's not how I would recommend that any of my clients do their deals. If you're paying for the thing, it's a work for hire and you should own it 100%. As a pro tip, when it comes to just kind of avoiding these scamsters, right? We're using music examples, but again, it's like any kind of deal you do in the entertainment industry, go with your gut. If you aren't sure on something, you don't have to be an attorney. to know that something isn't right. If they're charging you $100,000 and you're like, I'm just doing my first album in a music video, I guess it might be $100,000, but that sounds really pricey. Go with your gut. And that either means you need to get in touch with an entertainment attorney to talk about it, or that means in your negotiation, you say, I don't think so. That's way too much. I have $10,000. And then, when it comes to protecting yourself via contracts, I have that free contracts course on topmusicattorney.com. Make sure to go through that. I hit on other things on how they're trying to kind of scam you and manipulate you. And I want you guys to stay legally protected. So be sure to take that course.